Sometimes in war, the deadliest mistake isn't a bullet or a bomb, it's lunch. In World War I, a soldier's simple meal, a pot of soup bubbling in his helmet, turned into a signal flare for the enemy. Within minutes, shells rained down, trenches collapsed, and men paid with their lives. This is the forgotten story of the helmet soup disaster. By 1916, the First World War had consumed Europe. Millions of men were dug into endless lines of trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Life in those trenches was misery. Mud swallowed boots. Rats grew fat on corpses. Water filled dugouts. Soldiers lived like moles, sleeping under constant shell fire, never knowing if the next hour would be their last. Food was another battle. The army issued rations, but they were monotonous and often spoiled. Hard biscuits, canned meat, and watery stew were common, but never enough. Soldiers dreamed of hot meals. Cooking was rare. To light a fire in the open meant risking detection. Smoke and steam could be seen for miles. And in trench warfare, even a puff of smoke could invite disaster. Still, hungry men took chances. And sometimes, those chances ended in tragedy. On a quiet afternoon along the Western Front, a group of soldiers tried to make the best of their meager supplies. The front lines had been relatively calm for days, just occasional sniper shots and distant artillery. Among the men was Private William Billy Hart, a young soldier from London. Tired of eating cold biscuits, he decided to make something warm. He had a few potatoes from a farmer's field, a bit of meat from a recent ration, and, most importantly, an idea. He pulled off his steel helmet. In the trenches, helmets weren't just for protection. They were bowls, wash basins, even cooking pots. Soldiers joked that the British Brodie helmet was perfect for soup. And so, Hart began his makeshift kitchen. A small fire was lit in the bottom of the trench. Smoke curled upward, faint but visible. Hart balanced his helmet over the flames, filling it with water, potatoes, and scraps of meat. As the fire crackled, the water began to bubble. Steam rose in thin clouds, curling into the afternoon sky. His friends laughed. "Billy's opening a restaurant," one shouted. Others gathered, holding out spoons, joking about reservations for dinner. For a moment, the war seemed far away. But in the silent world of no man's land, every wisp of smoke and every curl of steam carried a deadly risk. Across the blasted landscape, in the German trenches, enemy lookouts scanned the horizon. Their orders were simple. Watch for movement, for glints of light, for anything unusual. Through binoculars, one sentry noticed something odd. Along the enemy trench, a faint white mist was rising. At first, he thought it was smoke. Then more steam rose. It was unusual, a sign that something was happening. He alerted his commander. The officer, suspicious, ordered artillery to test the spot. What the Germans saw was not a fire or a weapon. It was just Billy Hart's soup, but to them it looked like a signal, perhaps a concealed gun, or even troops massing under cover. And so, the artilleryman went to work. At first, the British soldiers didn't notice. The soup bubbled, the men joked, and the fire snapped cheerfully. Then came a whistling sound, the kind every soldier knew. "Down!" someone shouted. The first German shell exploded nearby, showering the trench with dirt and shrapnel. Men ducked for cover. Another shell landed, closer. Then another within seconds. The quiet afternoon turned into chaos. Billy's helmet flew from the fire, spilling hot soup into the mud. The men who had been laughing moments before were now scrambling for cover. Artillery doesn't pause for explanations. The Germans had locked onto their position, and the shells were falling with deadly precision. The trench shook under the barrage. Walls of mud collapsed. Splinters of wood and shards of metal filled the air. Men screamed for medics as shrapnel tore through them. The small fire was obliterated, but the shells kept coming. To the Germans, the steam rising from the trench had looked important, and they weren't going to stop until it was destroyed. For over an hour, shells pounded the trench. Communications were cut. Dugouts collapsed. Dozens of men were killed or wounded. What had been a routine day turned into a nightmare. And at the center of it all was a single mistake. Cooking soup in a helmet. When the bombardment finally lifted, the trench was in ruins. Bodies were carried out. Survivors sat in shock, covered in mud and blood, coughing from smoke and dust. Billy Hart survived, though burned by his spilled soup and deafened by the blasts. But many of his friends did not. Word spread quickly. Men whispered bitterly, "We got shelled over a bowl of soup." Others were angrier. "That idiot nearly got us all killed." Hart himself was shattered with guilt. What had begun as a small act of comfort had ended in destruction. He never forgave himself, though most soldiers knew the truth. Anyone could have made the same mistake. Hunger, fatigue, and desperation led men to take risks that in war could be fatal. the helmet soup disaster became a cautionary tale. Officers reminded their men, no cooking fires near the front lines, no steam, no smoke, no signs the enemy could spot. In trench warfare, survival depended on invisibility. A single curl of smoke could mean death. Soldiers often repeated the story, sometimes as a grim joke, sometimes as a warning. Don't be the soup cook, they said. It was one of many tales of how ordinary, human actions, cooking, smoking, coughing, could bring catastrophe in the unforgiving world of the Western Front. The tragedy also revealed something deeper about life in the trenches. These men weren't just soldiers, they were human beings, craving warmth, food, and a touch of normalcy. Imagine being cold, wet, and hungry for weeks. Imagine eating the same stale rations every day, dreaming of hot food. In that moment, Billy Hart wasn't thinking about enemy artillery. He was thinking about soup, about survival, comfort, and maybe even home. War punishes small mistakes, but it also punishes humanity itself. The helmet soup disaster wasn't just about carelessness. It was about the unbearable conditions that pushed men to gamble with their lives for a taste of normal life. Historians debate whether the story is literal or part of trench folklore. Different versions exist. Some place it in Flanders, others on the Somme, others in 1917 at Ypres. Some claim dozens died. Others say it was just a scare. But like the tale of the cigarette that gave away an army, the truth may not matter. The story captured a reality of trench life, that the smallest act could have deadly consequences. And so, the helmet soup disaster lived on, passed from soldier to soldier. Then from veterans to their families, then into books and documentaries. It is remembered not for the soup itself, but for what it represents. The fragility of life in war. In the history of the First World War, battles like the Somme, Verdun, and Passchendaele are remembered for their massive scale. But for the soldiers who lived through it, sometimes the smallest moments carried the heaviest weight. A single cigarette, a cough in the dark, or, in this case, a helmet of boiling soup. One man's lunch turned into a signal for death, and a lesson that echoed through the trenches. In war, nothing is small. The helmet soup disaster reminds us that in the mud of the Great War, humanity itself was both the greatest comfort and the greatest risk.